Returning to our top story today, and that is China's ambassador to Canada saying canola tariffs will be dropped if Canada drops its tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
A shockwave has just hit the world of global trade. Beijing has made a stunning public offer, one that caught even Donald Trump off guard. China's ambassador to Canada has announced that Beijing is ready to remove its crushing tariffs on Canadian canola if Ottawa drops its 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. No threats, no whispers, just a direct, strategic proposal that could rewrite Canada's trade future. A quiet statement from Beijing just thundered across global markets. The Chinese ambassador to Canada has announced that China is ready to lift its devastating tariffs on Canadian canola, but only if Ottawa scraps its 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. No threats, no hidden clauses, just a blunt trade proposal, one that caught even Donald Trump off guard. In Washington, aides say Trump didn't expect the Chinese to move this fast. He had believed Canada would remain tightly chained to America's trade line, obedient, cautious, predictable. But Beijing's offer wasn't routine diplomacy, it was a strategic ambush designed to expose that loyalty. For Canadian farmers, it felt like a sudden ray of hope after years of darkness. For U.S. officials, it was a shock, because it showed that China could bypass Washington entirely and speak directly to Canada as self-interest. And that raised a dangerous question. If Canada takes the deal, does it finally step out of America's shadow? The announcement rippled through political offices from Ottawa to the White House. Stock analysts scrambled. Agricultural groups cheered, and Trump, famously intolerant of surprises, was said to have muttered, "They're testing us." But Beijing wasn't testing, it was calculating, a move timed with surgical precision to hit where North American unity was weakest, trade dependence. Before this standoff, Canada had mirrored the United States almost word for word. When Washington declared a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, claiming unfair subsidies, Ottawa followed within weeks. The reasoning seemed patriotic, align with the ally, protect the auto industry. But Beijing's response was ruthless. It didn't strike Detroit, it struck Saskatchewan. China imposed painful restrictions on Canadian canola, a crop that once fueled rural prosperity and filled cargo ships bound for Chinese ports. Almost overnight, the world's biggest canola buyer vanished. Prices collapsed by nearly a third, bins filled. Farmers waited and waited for markets that never reopened. In boardrooms, Ottawa called it temporary turbulence. On the prairies, it was an economic blizzard. Rick White of the Canola Growers Association warned then, "This isn't politics, it's survival." But few listened. Canada had chosen loyalty to Washington over listening to its own soil. And that loyalty has cost billions in lost exports, emergency subsidies, and damaged credibility with one of the world's largest buyers. That's why Beijing's latest offer lands like a thunderclap, a way out, but at a political price. When the news broke, the first reaction inside Washington wasn't disbelief. It was panic. Because if Canada entertains China's proposal, it breaks a decades-old rhythm. America leads, Canada follows. A senior trade analyst in D.C. told Bloomberg, "If Ottawa accepts, it signals independence, and that terrifies Washington." Donald Trump built his political legend on controlling negotiations. In his world, allies don't improvise, they obey. But China had just rewritten the script, offering Canada a direct trade lifeline that excluded the United States entirely. Trump's advisors reportedly briefed him mid-morning. The former president, ever theatrical, slammed his hand on the desk and asked, "Are they seriously talking to China before talking to us?" To him, that was betrayal. To Beijing, it was brilliant strategy. To Ottawa, it was overdue diplomacy. Because for the first time in decades, Canada found itself with leverage. Both sides wanted something only it could provide. China wanted canola. Canada wanted affordable EVs. And the United States wanted obedience. For Beijing, it wasn't about friendship. It was about showing the world that the U.S. no longer controls every lever of Western trade. For Trump, it was humiliation, a reminder that the same tariffs he weaponized could now be turned against him. This is more than a trade decision, the narrator continues. It's a referendum on Canada's sovereignty. If Ottawa rejects China's offer, it remains Washington's loyal echo and continues to pay for that loyalty with its own economy. If it accepts, it risks U.S. retaliation, but could revive its struggling agricultural sector overnight. This isn't theory. It's the lives of tens of thousands of farmers, engineers, and small-town exporters who depend on trade routes that politics keeps blocking. Meanwhile, consumers are paying the cost, because Chinese EVs, sold in Europe for the equivalent of $35,000 Canadian, could revolutionize Canada's green transition market. Instead, protectionist tariffs have turned them into forbidden fruit, affordable, efficient, and unavailable. Cut to visual contrast, sleek Chinese EVs in London streets versus Canadian families staring at dealership prices. The irony is staggering. A country that prides itself on free markets and climate leadership has priced out the very vehicles that could speed its energy transition, all to keep pace with an American policy built on suspicion, not strategy. Former NDP leader Tom Mulcair summarized it succinctly. Canada keeps getting dragged into other people's trade wars, only to find itself bleeding economically. Every statistic backs him up. Since the canola tariffs, losses have surpassed $1 billion annually. Meanwhile, China has doubled EV exports to Europe and the UK. The world is moving and Canada is standing still. Music rises subtly, violin over heartbeat rhythm. In cabinet rooms, Prime Minister Mark Carney faces a decision that could define his tenure. Maintain loyalty to Washington's tariffs, or make an independent deal that prioritizes Canadian prosperity. His advisors whisper of consequences, sanctions, U.S. anger, diplomatic frost. But the farmers outside his office windows whisper louder. Markets, prices, survival. This is the intersection of politics and pragmatism, where every move is a message. If Ottawa acts cautiously, it signals weakness. If it acts boldly, it risks breaking the unwritten North American code. Never contradict Washington on China. Every empire tests its allies, until one finally says no. For Canada, that moment may be right now. Far from the corridors of Ottawa, in the wind-swept towns of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the consequences of this trade war are no longer political, they're personal. Bins are full, trucks idle, and the scent of unsold grain hangs in the air. For canola farmers, the tariff fight isn't a diplomatic debate. It's a slow bleed. Rick White, president of the Canadian Canola Growers Association, describes it simply. Since these tariffs came on, no canola has been going to China. Seed, oil, or meal. Prices are depressed and storage is full. We can't move it. We can't breathe. They met with Prime Minister Mark Carney weeks ago, begging for relief. But bureaucracy moves slower than hunger. The government talks about reviewing policy, while farmers talk about losing farms their families have held for generations. These people aren't political pawns. They're the backbone of Canada's agricultural identity, yet they're repaying the price for tariffs they didn't ask for and wars they didn't start. Rick White's closing line cuts through all the noise. Farmers don't want press conferences. We want our markets back. And behind that plea lies a deeper truth. Every political decision has a human cost. While Canadian farmers wait, Beijing smiles quietly, because this isn't just a deal, it's a chess move. China has mastered a diplomacy built on contradiction, soft words, hard timing. By offering to lift tariffs right now, Beijing presents itself as reasonable while subtly tightening Canada's dilemma. If Ottawa rejects the offer, farmers keep suffering and China looks patient. If Ottawa accepts, Washington feels betrayed and Canada's allegiance fractures. Either way, Beijing wins. China's strategy runs deeper than headlines. It's about reshaping influence, decoupling American allies one by one, using trade instead of threats. And the move is working. In Europe, Chinese EVs already dominate markets once closed to them. In the UK, MG and BYD vehicles top sales charts. In Australia, Chinese models sell out before they hit lots. Meanwhile, Canada, abundant in lithium, cobalt, and rare earth metals, remains locked out of the boom. Experts at the Asia-Pacific Foundation call Beijing's move a diplomatic masterstroke. It allows China to play savior to Canadian farmers while casting Washington as the villain who started the fire. The brilliance of the trap is that it's built from logic. If tariffs are mutual, so should relief be. If cooperation is good for both sides, why not accept it? And that's the question Beijing wants the world to ask, not about loyalty, but about sanity. Donald Trump's trade doctrine was built on one principle: dominance through dependency. The U.S. leads, others follow, no exceptions. But now China has offered Canada something that America can't: a practical solution. And that terrifies Trump more than confrontation ever could. Inside Mar-a-Lago, advisors say Trump was visibly irritated when briefed on Beijing's proposal. He reportedly asked, "Are they really thinking of going behind our back?" Because if Canada accepts, it sends a message to the entire Western alliance. America no longer controls the game. Trump's fear isn't about canola or cars, it's about precedent. If Canada can strike an independent deal with China, so can others. And that fractures the carefully built wall of U.S. trade dominance. For years, the U.S. has pressured allies to isolate Chinese tech, EVs, and 5G companies. But Beijing knows that economic gravity always wins. When goods are cheaper, better, and more available, ideology fades, and Trump knows it too. That's why this moment stings. It exposes his biggest vulnerability: a world tired of choosing sides. Back in Ottawa, Mark Carney sees that clearly. His aides whisper that the Prime Minister is weighing independence against retaliation. But as one diplomat put it, if Canada waits for America's permission to protect its farmers, it's already lost. For Trump, the fear isn't losing tariffs, it's losing control. Now comes the choice that will define Canada's next decade. Does Ottawa double down on Washington's playbook, sacrificing its farmers and consumers to maintain alliance optics? Or does it pivot, seizing Beijing's offer not as surrender, but as strategy? Because the truth is, lifting the EV tariffs isn't weakness, it's evolution. Instead of blocking Chinese EVs, Canada could invite them in, under Canadian conditions. Factories built in Ontario, powered by Canadian labor, using Canadian lithium and aluminum. EVs stamped not with "made in China," but "built in Canada." That's how you transform an economy, from follower to leader. Trade doesn't have to be a battlefield. It can be a blueprint for renewal. But time is short. Each harvest that passes under tariffs is a loss measured in livelihoods. Each month that EVs remain banned is another missed opportunity in the Green Revolution. And history doesn't wait for indecision. Every time Canada mirrored Washington, it paid dearly. Steel tariffs, aluminum tariffs, softwood lumber fights, dairy disputes. Every time the U.S. hit first and apologized later. And every time Ottawa called it solidarity. But this time, solidarity looks a lot like self-sabotage. Beijing's offer is more than a trade deal. It's a mirror. It shows Canada exactly what it values: its loyalty or its livelihood. Donald Trump watches from afar, shocked that Beijing outmaneuvered him without firing a shot. But this isn't about him anymore. It's about whether Canada will keep playing by someone else's rules, or finally write its own. Every empire tests its allies, every nation faces its moment of choice. And now, Canada has arrived.